The graduation invitation sat on my kitchen counter like a cruel joke, the elegant script mocking me with words I never thought I'd read. Please do not bring Mom. I'm serious about this. I stared at the handwritten note paperclipped to the back of the formal invitation, my coffee growing cold in my trembling hands. After 18 years of sleepless nights, homework battles, soccer practices, and countless sacrifices, my own son didn't want me at the most important milestone of his young life. Before we dive into this unbelievable tale, please like and subscribe. I read every comment, so tell me where you're from. My name is Rebecca Young, I'm 46 years old, and I thought I knew my family. The morning sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows of our modest two-story home felt different somehow, casting shadows that seemed longer and darker than usual. The house where we'd built so many memories suddenly felt foreign, like I was seeing it through a stranger's eyes. I picked up my phone with shaking fingers and dialed my son Marcus. At 18, he was taller than me now, with his father's stubborn jaw and my own green eyes. We'd always been close, or so I believed. He was supposed to be staying at his friend's house for the weekend, preparing for finals. Mom, I can't talk right now, Marcus said when he answered, his voice distant and cold in a way I'd never heard before. Marcus, honey, I found your note. What's this about? What did I do wrong? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could hear voices in the background, laughter that didn't include me. You wouldn't understand, Mom. Just please don't come to graduation. You'll just make things worse. Make what worse? Marcus, talk to me. We've always been able to talk about everything. Not this time. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. I sank into one of the mismatched kitchen chairs I'd bought secondhand when Marcus was little. The same chairs where we'd eaten countless breakfasts together, where I'd helped him with algebra homework, where we'd planned his college applications just months ago. Now they felt like relics from someone else's life. The front door opened with its familiar creak, and I heard my mother's voice calling from the entryway. Rebecca, I brought those cookies for Marcus's graduation party. Margaret Young stepped into the kitchen carrying a Tupperware container, her silver hair perfectly styled despite being 72 years old. She'd been my rock since my husband died 8 years ago, helping me raise Marcus when I was drowning in grief and single parenthood. Her sharp blue eyes immediately caught the distress on my face. What's wrong, sweetheart? She set the cookies on the counter and moved toward me with the same protective instinct that had gotten me through the darkest period of my life. I handed her the invitation and watched her face change as she read Marcus's note. Her expression shifted from confusion to something harder, more calculating. This doesn't sound like Marcus at all. Someone's been filling his head with nonsense. But who would do that? And why? I stood up and began pacing the small kitchen, my mind racing through recent conversations, looking for clues I might have missed. He's been staying out more lately, spending time with new friends, but I thought that was normal for a senior. Margaret set the invitation down carefully, her movements deliberate. Rebecca, there's something I need to tell you. I didn't want to worry you, but I've been hearing things around town. My heart sank further. Our small town of Millbrook thrived on gossip, and I'd always tried to stay above the fray, focusing on work and raising Marcus. What kind of things? People talking about your family, saying things that aren't true. I thought it would blow over, but maybe it's gotten back to Marcus somehow. Before I could ask for details, my phone buzzed with a text from my friend Elena Santos. She worked at the local community center where I volunteered, and we'd become close over the past few years. Her message was brief but urgent. Can you meet me at the park? It's about Marcus. Important. Elena had been the one person outside my family who'd supported me through everything. When other single mothers judged my parenting choices, when people whispered about how I was raising Marcus without a father figure, Elena had been there with practical advice and unwavering friendship. If she was reaching out about Marcus, it had to be serious. I grabbed my keys, my mind spinning with possibilities. "Mom, can you stay here in case Marcus comes home?" Margaret nodded, her expression grim. "Go. But Rebecca, whatever's happening, we'll figure it out together. That boy loves you more than anything in this world." The 15-minute drive to Riverside Park felt like an hour. I kept replaying every interaction I'd had with Marcus over the past few months, searching for signs I'd missed. He'd been quieter at dinner, spending more time in his room, but I'd attributed it to normal teenage behavior and the stress of senior year. Elena was sitting on our usual bench overlooking the small pond where Marcus used to feed ducks as a child. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her usually warm expression was troubled. She'd been a constant in our lives since she'd moved to Millbrook 5 years ago. The kind of friend who showed up with soup when you were sick and remembered every important date. "Elena, what's going on? Your text scared me." She patted the bench beside her, and I sat down, noticing how she avoided my eyes. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. But you need to know the truth about what's been happening to Marcus." My stomach clenched. "Just tell me." Elena took a deep breath, finally meeting my gaze. "Someone's been systematically turning Marcus against you, feeding him stories about things you supposedly did, things you supposedly said about him, making him believe that you're embarrassed of him, that you think he's not good enough. That's insane. I would never say anything like that about Marcus. He's my whole world." "I know that, and you know that, but Marcus doesn't know that anymore." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "Rebecca, I think I know who's been doing this to your family." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Somewhere in our small town, someone had been working to destroy the most important relationship in my life. Someone had been poisoning my son's mind against me, and I had no idea why. One small detail blew the whole thing open. "Elena, you're scaring me. Just tell me who it is." Elena shifted on the bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "It's your mother, Rebecca. It's Margaret." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at Elena, waiting for her to take it back, to say she was mistaken. When she didn't, I shook my head violently. "No, absolutely not. My mother loves Marcus. She's been nothing but supportive since he was born. She lives with us, Elena. She helps with everything." "I know how this sounds," Elena said softly. "I didn't want to believe it either. But I've seen it happening, Rebecca. Little comments here and there when you're not around. Questions that plant seeds of doubt in Marcus's mind." My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. "What kind of comments? What are you talking about?" Elena looked out over the pond, watching a family of ducks glide across the water. "Last month, when Marcus was at my house working on that history project with my daughter, he mentioned feeling like he wasn't living up to your expectations. I asked him why he felt that way, and he said his grandmother had been asking him if he thought you were proud of him, if he thought you bragged about him to your friends the way other mothers did." "But I do brag about him. I'm constantly talking about his achievements, his college applications, how proud I am." "I know that. But when Margaret asks those questions in a certain way, with a certain tone, it makes Marcus doubt what he knows to be true." Elena finally looked at me again, her eyes filled with sympathy. She's been very subtle about it, asking him if he thinks you're disappointed that he chose community college over a 4-year university, wondering out loud if you wish he was more like other kids his age. I felt sick. This doesn't make sense. Why would she do this? She's been nothing but helpful since she moved in with us 3 years ago after Dad died. Think about it, Rebecca. Really think about the timing of when Marcus started pulling away from you. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember. Marcus had been excited about graduation at the beginning of the school year. We talked about the ceremony, about celebrating afterward. The change had been gradual, so slow I'd barely noticed it happening. It started around Christmas, I said quietly. He seemed different after the holidays. That's when Margaret really started intensifying her comments, Elena confirmed. I've heard some of them myself when she didn't know I was listening. Rebecca, I think she's jealous of your relationship with Marcus. I think she wants to be the most important person in his life. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. My own mother, the woman who'd held my hand through labor, who'd helped me navigate those terrifying early years of single parenthood, had been systematically destroying my relationship with my son. How long have you known about this? I asked. Elena's cheeks flushed. I've suspected for a couple of months, but I wasn't sure. I kept thinking maybe I was misinterpreting things. Maybe Margaret was just being a concerned grandmother. But last week, I heard her talking to Marcus when they were in your backyard. She was telling him that you'd confided in her about being worried he wasn't mature enough for college, that you were concerned about how he'd represent the family. I never said any of that. Elena, I never said anything remotely like that. I know you didn't. That's when I realized what was really happening. Elena reached over and squeezed my hand. Margaret has been creating a narrative where you're disappointed in Marcus, and she's the one who truly believes in him. She's positioning herself as his advocate and you as his critic. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. All those times Marcus had seemed surprised when I praised him, as if he hadn't expected it. The way he'd started going to Margaret with problems instead of coming to me. How he'd begun questioning decisions we'd made together, asking if I really thought they were the right choices. This morning, when he said he was embarrassed of me, when he said I wasn't the kind of mother he wanted at his graduation, I trailed off, the full impact of the betrayal washing over me. Those weren't his words, Rebecca. Those were Margaret's words coming out of his mouth. She's been poisoning him against you so gradually, so carefully, that he thinks these doubts are his own. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the pond. The late afternoon sun was casting everything in golden light, making the scene peaceful and serene, completely at odds with the chaos in my heart. How do I fix this? How do I make Marcus see the truth without sounding like I'm attacking his grandmother? He's 18 years old, Elena. If I tell him what she's been doing and he doesn't believe me, I could lose him forever. I don't know, Elena admitted. But Rebecca, you have to try. Margaret isn't going to stop. If anything, she'll probably get worse now that Marcus is graduating and might be moving out for college. She's running out of time to completely turn him against you. My phone buzzed with a text message. I pulled it out, hoping it might be from Marcus, but it was from Margaret. Marcus came home. He's in his room. Where are you? We need to talk. I showed the text to Elena, and her expression darkened. She knows something's wrong. She probably realizes Marcus went too far this morning, said too much. She's going to try to do damage control. I have to go home and face her. My voice sounded stronger than I felt. But Elena, what if I'm wrong? What if Marcus really does feel embarrassed by me? What if I confront Margaret and I'm completely off base? Elena stood up and faced me directly. Rebecca, in the 5 years I've known you, I've watched you raise that boy with more love, dedication, and sacrifice than most parents could manage. You worked 2 jobs to pay for his music lessons. You drove 3 hours each way to take him to academic competitions. You've celebrated every achievement and supported him through every setback. Marcus adores you, or at least he did before Margaret started her campaign. But what if... No. Elena's voice was firm. You are an amazing mother, and Marcus knows that deep down. Margaret has been exploiting his normal teenage insecurities and his fears about growing up. But the foundation you built with him is stronger than her manipulation. I took a deep breath, trying to steel myself for what was coming. Going home meant confronting not just Marcus, but the woman who'd raised me, the woman I'd trusted to help me raise my son. Will you come with me? I asked. I don't think I can face this alone. Elena nodded without hesitation. Of course. But Rebecca, you need to be prepared for the possibility that Margaret won't admit what she's been doing. And Marcus might not believe you, at least not at first. As we walked back to our cars, I felt like I was preparing for battle. But this wasn't a fight I could win with arguments or evidence. This was about saving my relationship with my son, and I had no idea if I was already too late. The drive home felt endless, even with Elena following behind me in her own car. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had gone white, and I kept rehearsing different ways to approach the conversation waiting for me. The familiar streets of my neighborhood looked different somehow, as if I was seeing them through new eyes. The small ranch house I'd called home for the past 12 years came into view. Its blue shutters and carefully tended flower beds, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside me. Margaret's car sat in the driveway, positioned at an angle that suggested she'd been in a hurry when she arrived. I parked on the street, giving Elena space to pull up behind me. As I sat there for a moment, staring at the house where I'd raised my son, memories flooded back. Marcus taking his first steps across that front porch. Teaching him to ride his bike on this very sidewalk. The countless evenings we'd spent on the front steps, talking about his day at school while Margaret worked late shifts at the hospital. When had everything changed? When had those precious moments become ammunition for Margaret to use against me? Elena appeared at my car window, tapping gently. I rolled it down, grateful for the warm afternoon air that carried the scent of the honeysuckle growing along our fence line. You don't have to do this right now, Elena said softly. We could wait, give you more time to think about what you want to say. I shook my head, watching a curtain twitch in the front window. She knows I'm here, and honestly, if I don't do this now, I might lose my nerve completely. The front door opened before we even reached the porch steps. Margaret stood in the doorway, still wearing her navy blue work scrubs, her silver hair pulled back in its usual neat bun. At 62, she maintained the same no-nonsense posture that had served her well during her decades as a cardiac nurse. But there was something different in her expression today, a tightness around her eyes that I couldn't quite read. Rebecca, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Elena. She nodded politely at my friend, but didn't step aside to let us in. I wasn't expecting company. We need to talk, Margaret. I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. About Marcus, about what happened this morning. Something flickered across Margaret's face before she composed herself. Of course, come in. She stepped back, allowing us into the living room I knew as well as my own heartbeat. The familiar brown leather couch where Marcus and I had watched countless movies together. The bookshelf filled with his academic awards and the photos that documented his childhood. Everything looked exactly the same, yet felt completely foreign. Margaret settled into her usual armchair, the one positioned to have a clear view of both the television and anyone entering the room. It was a strategic choice, I realize now, one that allowed her to maintain control of conversations. Elena and I sat on the couch, close enough that I could draw strength from her presence. "Where's Marcus?" I asked, glancing toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. "In his room, doing homework. He's quite upset about this morning." Margaret's tone carried just the right note of concern, but I caught the way her fingers drummed against the arm of her chair. "Rebecca, I think we need to discuss some things that have been troubling him." "Yes," I said carefully. "I think we do." Margaret leaned forward slightly, her expression taking on the same look she'd worn when I was 17 and had disappointed her in some way. "Marcus has been coming to me for months, worried about how to tell you that he's outgrown some of the things you still try to do for him. He loves you, of course, but he's 18 now. He needs space to become his own man." The words hit me like physical blows, each one carefully chosen and delivered with surgical precision. I could see Elena tense beside me, but I forced myself to remain calm. "What kinds of things, Margaret?" "Well, for instance, the way you still pack his lunches sometimes, the notes you leave in his backpack, the way you call him sweetheart in front of his friends." Margaret's voice was gentle, understanding, as if she was merely the messenger delivering painful but necessary truths. "He doesn't want to hurt your feelings, but he's embarrassed. Boys his age need to feel independent." Each example felt like a knife twisting in my chest, because they were all things I did out of love. The lunch packing happened maybe once a month when Marcus was running late. The notes were rare, usually just encouraging words before big tests. And yes, I did call him sweetheart, because he was my sweetheart, my precious son who'd given me purpose and joy for 18 years. "Did Marcus specifically tell you he was embarrassed by these things?" Elena's voice was quiet, but pointed. Margaret's eyes sharpened as they focused on Elena. "I've raised children, dear. I know the signs. Rebecca has always been a bit overwhelming in her affection. It was fine when Marcus was younger, but now it's holding him back." The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Overwhelming in my affection. As if loving my son too much was a character flaw, something to be ashamed of. "I've never held Marcus back," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "I've supported every dream he's ever had. I've sacrificed to make sure he had opportunities." "Yes, and you've made sure he knows about every sacrifice." Margaret's tone remained understanding, but there was steel underneath now. "That's quite a burden for a young man to carry, don't you think? The constant reminder of how much his mother has given up for him?" I felt Elena's hand find mine, squeezing gently. The support gave me strength to push back against the familiar spiral of doubt and guilt that Margaret's words triggered. "When have I ever made Marcus feel guilty about my choices?" "It doesn't have to be explicit, Rebecca. It's in the way you talk about working 2 jobs, the way you mention how tired you are, the way you sigh when bills come in. Children absorb these things. They feel responsible." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the mantel clock, the same clock that had marked the hours of Marcus's childhood. I stared at Margaret, this woman who'd raised me, who'd helped me through the terrifying early years of single motherhood, and felt like I was seeing her clearly for the first time. "You've been talking to Marcus about this for months?" I asked slowly. He needed someone to confide in, someone who could give him perspective on the situation. "What situation, exactly?" Margaret shifted in her chair, and I caught a flicker of something that might have been uncertainty. The situation of having a mother who hasn't quite learned to let go. The sound of a door opening down the hallway made us all turn. Marcus appeared, still wearing the clothes he'd had on that morning, his dark hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he looked younger than his 18 years. "I heard voices," he said quietly, his gaze moving between the three of us. "Mom, I didn't know you were back." The uncertainty in his voice, so different from the cold anger of that morning, gave me hope. This was my son, the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who still hugged me goodnight when his friends weren't around. "Marcus," I said gently, "we need to talk." He looked exhausted, and something maternal in me wanted to pull him into my arms the way I had when he was small, and the world felt too big for him. But I stayed seated, uncertain of my welcome after this morning's harsh words. "Yes," I said softly, "we do need to talk." Marcus glanced at Margaret, and I caught the silent communication between them. A look that spoke of shared conversations, of confidence given and received. It stung more than I wanted to admit. "Maybe we should speak privately," Elena suggested, starting to rise from her chair. "No." The word came out more firmly than I'd intended. "Stay, please." I looked at my son, then at Margaret. "I think we've had enough private conversations that exclude the people who should be included." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "Rebecca, there's no need to be dramatic." "Dramatic?" I felt something shift inside me, a strength I hadn't known I possessed. "My son told me this morning that he's embarrassed to have me as his mother. My own mother has apparently been counseling him for months about my failures as a parent. And you think I'm being dramatic?" Marcus flinched. "Mom, I didn't mean it like that. Not exactly." "Then how did you mean it?" I asked, and I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Because I've been replaying your words all day, trying to understand where I went so wrong that my own son doesn't want me at his graduation." He moved into the room slowly, like he was approaching a wounded animal. "It's not that I don't want you there. It's just—" He glanced at Margaret again, and she gave him an encouraging nod that made my chest tight. "It's just what, sweetheart?" "It's just that sometimes I feel like I can't breathe," he said in a rush. "Like everything I do has to be perfect because you've worked so hard and sacrificed so much, and if I mess up, I'm letting you down. And then, at graduation, you'll cry and make a scene, and everyone will look at us, and I just wanted one day where I could feel normal." The words hit me like physical blows. Each one landed with precision, finding the soft spots where my own insecurities lived. I felt Elena's hand tighten on mine, anchoring me. "When have I ever made a scene?" I asked quietly. "At my 8th grade promotion, you cried so loud that Mrs. Henderson came over to check if you were okay. At my soccer banquet, you kept taking pictures and calling out my name until Coach asked you to sit down. Last month at parent night, you asked Mr. Stevens so many questions about my grades that he had to cut you off so other parents could talk. Each example felt like a small death. I remembered those moments differently. The proud tears, the desire to capture every moment of his success, the determination to be an engaged parent who cared about his education. But through his eyes, through the eyes of an 18-year-old boy trying to find his place in the world, I saw something else entirely. "I was proud of you," I whispered. "I know you were, and I love that about you, Mom. I do. But sometimes your pride feels so big that there's no room left for me to just exist." Margaret leaned forward. "You see, Rebecca? This is exactly what we've been discussing. Marcus needs space to become his own person." I turned to look at her, this woman who'd helped raise me, but who seemed determined to point out every way I was failing to raise my own son. "And you thought the best way to handle this was to have secret conversations with my child instead of talking to me? They weren't secret. I simply provided a safe space for Marcus to process his feelings. A safe space away from me? Sometimes that's necessary. Elena cleared her throat gently. Marcus, can I ask you something? He nodded, looking grateful for the interruption. Do you think your mother loves you? Of course she does. That's not the question. Do you think she's proud of you? Sometimes too much. And do you think she wants what's best for you? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between Elena and me. Yes. But I think sometimes she thinks she knows what's best better than I do. The honesty in his voice was devastating and illuminating at the same time. I could see the boy I'd raised, thoughtful and kind, trying to navigate between hurting me and speaking his truth. You're right, I said, and I saw surprise flicker across all three faces. You're absolutely right. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, but there was something liberating about it too. I have been overwhelming. I have been too involved, and I have made you feel responsible for justifying my sacrifices. Margaret looked taken aback. This wasn't the defensive reaction she'd expected. But, Marcus, I continued, meeting my son's eyes directly. I need you to understand something. What your grandmother sees as overwhelming love, what you experience as pressure, that's the only way I knew how to parent. I was 22 when I had you. I was terrified every single day that I was going to mess you up, that I wasn't going to be enough. Mom? Let me finish. My voice was steady now, stronger. I worked 2 jobs not just to support us, but to prove to myself and everyone else that I could do this alone. I cheered too loud and took too many pictures because I was so damn grateful that despite everything, you were thriving. I asked too many questions because I was afraid that if I didn't advocate for you, no one would. The room was completely silent now. Even the clock seemed to have stopped ticking. But you know what I'm realizing? In trying so hard to be everything for you, I forgot to teach you something crucial. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I forgot to teach you that you don't owe me anything for loving you. That's what parents do. That's what love is. Marcus's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I never wanted to hurt you. I know, baby, and I never wanted to suffocate you. I stood up slowly, crossing to where he stood. But here's what I need from you now. I need you to tell me directly when I'm doing too much. Not your grandmother, me. Because this is our relationship, and we're the ones who get to define it. What about graduation? He asked quietly. I took a deep breath, looking at this young man I'd raised, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time as an adult with his own needs and boundaries. What would make you comfortable? Really comfortable, not what you think I want to hear. He was quiet for so long, I wondered if he'd answer. Finally, he looked up at me with those dark eyes that had been the center of my universe for 18 years. I want you there, he said. I do. But I want you there as someone who's proud of me, not someone who's proving something to the world. Can you help me understand the difference? Before he could answer, Margaret stood up abruptly. This is exactly the problem, Rebecca. You're putting the burden on him again. Making him responsible for managing your emotions. I felt the familiar spiral starting, the doubt creeping in, but then Elena's voice cut through it. Actually, I think she's doing exactly the right thing. All eyes turned to her, and she stood, moving to stand beside me. She's asking for clear communication about boundaries. She's taking responsibility for her past behavior, while also asking for help in changing it. That's not putting a burden on Marcus. That's modeling healthy relationship skills. Margaret's face flushed. That's not your place to... Stop. The word came from Marcus, and it was firm enough to surprise all of us. Just stop. This is between me and Mom. He looked at me then, and I saw something new in his expression. Not the boy trying to please everyone, but a young man taking control of his own narrative. I want to figure this out with you, Mom. Just us. No more family meetings where people talk about our relationship like we're not both adults who can handle it ourselves. The words hung in the air, and I realized my son had just drawn a line in the sand that would change everything. But as Margaret's face darkened with displeasure, I wondered if the battle for Marcus's independence was just beginning. Margaret's jaw tightened at Marcus's declaration, and I watched as she visibly struggled to contain her response. The silence stretched uncomfortably until she finally spoke, her voice carefully controlled. Marcus, I understand you want independence, but you're making decisions without considering the bigger picture. Your mother has a pattern of behavior That's exactly what I'm talking about, Marcus interrupted, and I could hear the frustration building in his voice. You're doing it right now, talking about Mom like she's not standing right here, like she's incapable of learning or changing. Elena shifted beside me, and I could feel her tension as she watched the confrontation unfold. I wanted to step in, to smooth things over like I always did, but something held me back. Maybe it was seeing Marcus finally standing up for himself, or maybe it was realizing that Margaret's protection, however well-intentioned, was becoming another cage. I'm trying to protect you, Margaret said, her voice rising slightly. I've watched your mother overwhelm you your entire life. The birthday parties that were more about her social media than your happiness. The way she inserted herself into your friendships. The constant need for validation through your achievements. Each word hit like a physical blow, and I felt my cheeks burn with shame because there was truth in what she was saying. But Marcus stepped closer to me, and his presence gave me strength. Maybe that's true, he said quietly. Some of it, anyway. But that doesn't mean she can't change. And it doesn't mean you get to make decisions about our relationship for us. Marcus. Margaret's voice softened, becoming almost pleading. You've never been able to set boundaries with her. You told me yourself that you felt suffocated. Don't let one conversation change years of experience. I watched my son's face carefully, seeing the doubt creep in. Part of me wanted to jump in and defend myself, but Elena's earlier words echoed in my mind. This wasn't about me proving anything. This was about Marcus finding his own voice. You're right, Marcus said finally, and my heart sank. I have felt suffocated, and I haven't been good at setting boundaries. He paused, looking directly at Margaret. But I haven't been good at setting them with anyone, Grandma, including you. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and I saw Margaret's eyes widen in surprise. What do you mean by that? Margaret asked, her voice carefully neutral. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his way of gathering courage. I mean that when I told you I was embarrassed about Mom coming to graduation, you immediately took over. You called her. You set up this meeting. You decided what needed to happen. You didn't ask if that's what I wanted. I was helping you, Margaret protested. You came to me upset, and You did what you thought was best, Marcus finished. Just like Mom does. You both love me, and you both think you know what I need better than I do. Elena made a small sound, something between surprise and approval, and I found myself looking at my son with new eyes. When had he become so insightful? Margaret sat down heavily, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked uncertain. I was trying to support you. I know, Marcus said gently, but support doesn't mean taking over. It means helping me figure out what I want and how to ask for it myself. I felt tears prick my eyes as I realized what was happening. My son wasn't just setting boundaries with me. He was learning to set them with everyone, including the grandmother who had been his refuge from my overwhelming love. So what do you want? I asked quietly. Not what I want. Not what your grandmother thinks is best. What do you actually want? Marcus looked between Margaret and me, then at Elena, who had been quietly witnessing this family reckoning. I want to go to graduation with the people I love, without feeling like I have to manage anyone's emotions but my own, he said. I want Mom there because she's proud of me, not because she needs to prove she's a good mother. And I want Grandma there because she loves me, not because she's monitoring Mom's behavior. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's face had gone pale, and I could see her struggling with Marcus's assessment of her motivations. And if we can't do that? Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus looked at her with such love and sadness that my heart broke for both of them. Then maybe, he said carefully, I need to go alone. The words hit the room like a thunderclap, and I realized that my fight for a place at my son's graduation had just become something much bigger and more complicated than I had ever imagined. The weight of Marcus's ultimatum settled over us like fog. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee cup, and I watched my son's face, searching for any sign that he might take back those devastating words. Elena broke the silence first. Marcus, that's a big step. Are you sure that's what you want? I don't want it, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I need to know that I can choose it. Does that make sense? I found myself nodding before I could stop myself. It did make sense, in a way that cut straight through to the heart of everything I'd been doing wrong. You want to know that we're there because you want us there, I said slowly. Not because we've guilted or manipulated our way in. Exactly. Marcus turned to me with something like relief in his eyes. Mom, I love you. I love how proud you are of me, how you celebrate every little thing I do. But sometimes it feels like your happiness depends on me, including you in everything, and that's a lot of pressure. I finished, and the admission felt like swallowing glass. Margaret had been quiet through this exchange, but now she looked up at Marcus with tears in her eyes. And I made it worse by trying to fix it for you instead of helping you talk to your mother yourself. You were protecting me, Marcus said gently. The same way you always have. But I'm 22, Grandma. I need to learn how to have hard conversations myself. Elena shifted forward in her chair. Can I ask something? Marcus, what would it look like if your mom and grandmother were at graduation in a way that felt good to you? Marcus considered this, and I held my breath, waiting for his answer. I guess, he said slowly. It would mean Mom being happy for me without needing me to prove how much I appreciate her being there. And it would mean Grandma trusting that Mom and I can work things out without her having to step in and manage us. Margaret winced. Is that really what I do? Sometimes, Marcus said, and his honesty was both brutal and kind. You've been taking care of both of us for so long, I think you forgot that we might be able to take care of ourselves. I saw the moment Margaret understood what he meant, the way her face crumpled slightly before she straightened her shoulders. She had been managing our relationship for years, smoothing over my mistakes, translating my overwhelming love into something Marcus could accept. But in doing so, she had prevented both of us from learning how to navigate our own relationship. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Marcus looked between Margaret and me, and I could see him gathering his courage again. "Now, we figure out if you can both let me be an adult," he said. "If Mom can come to graduation just to celebrate with me, not to prove anything about our relationship. And if Grandma can trust us to figure this out ourselves." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I've been interfering," she said finally, and the words seemed to cost her. "I thought I was helping, but I was really just controlling things so no one would get hurt. And I've been making my love conditional," I admitted, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "Making you feel like you had to include me to keep me happy?" Elena nodded approvingly. "Those are both big things to recognize, but recognizing them is different from changing them." Marcus leaned forward, his expression intense. "The thing is, I do want you both there. I want Mom there because she taught me that working hard matters and that it's okay to be proud of what you accomplish. I want Grandma there because she showed me what unconditional support looks like." My heart lifted at his words, but he held up a hand. "But I need to know that if I ever do need space, or if I make choices you don't understand, you'll both respect that without making it about yourselves." Margaret and I exchanged a look, and for the first time in years, I saw her not as Marcus's other parent or my critic, but as another woman who loved him so much it sometimes clouded her judgment. "That's going to be hard," Margaret said honestly. "It is," Marcus agreed. "But if we can't figure it out, then I'll know I'm not ready for the kind of adult relationship I want to have with both of you." The threat was implicit but clear. If we couldn't learn to love him without controlling him, we would lose him entirely. Elena glanced at her watch, and then at me meaningfully. "What if we started small? What would it look like for you to support Marcus through graduation week without making it about proving your relationship?" I thought about all the plans I'd been making, all the ways I'd been imagining celebrating his achievement, and realized how many of them had been about me rather than him. "I guess I'd have to ask what kind of support you actually want," I said to Marcus, instead of assuming I know. "And I'd have to let you two have that conversation without jumping in to fix things," Margaret added quietly. Marcus smiled for the first time since this conversation began, but it was tentative, hopeful, rather than relieved. "Okay," he said. "So let's try. Mom, what I'd really like is for you to come to graduation and be proud of me. Sit with Grandma, cheer when they call my name, take some pictures. But I don't want a big party or a bunch of posts about what an amazing son I am. I just want to celebrate the accomplishment, not our relationship." I felt something inside me resist the simplicity of what he was asking for, the way it required me to step back rather than step forward. But I also felt something else, respect for the young man he'd become, the one who could ask for what he needed with such clarity. "I can do that," I said, and meant it. But even as I spoke, I saw the doubt flicker across both Marcus's and Margaret's faces, and I realized that my words, however sincere, weren't going to be enough to undo years of patterns. The real test was going to be whether I could actually follow through when the moment came. The week leading up to graduation became a careful dance of intention and restraint. I found myself constantly catching my thoughts before they turned into actions, questioning every impulse to document or orchestrate Marcus's milestone. Tuesday morning, I was making breakfast when Marcus came downstairs in his cap and gown for the final rehearsal. My first instinct was to grab my phone, to capture this moment of him looking so grown up in our kitchen. Instead, I set down the spatula and just looked at him. "You look good," I said simply. He adjusted the cap self-consciously. "Feels weird. Like I'm playing dress-up. That's normal. I felt the same way at my graduation." I turned back to the eggs, then added, "Are you nervous about today?" "A little. Mostly excited, though." He poured himself orange juice and sat at the counter. "Thanks for not making this into a production." The comment stung slightly, but I recognized it as progress that he felt comfortable enough to acknowledge the change. "It's harder than I thought it would be," I admitted. "I know, but it means a lot." After he left for rehearsal, I called Margaret. We'd been talking more since the session with Elena, tentative conversations about how to support Marcus without overwhelming him. "He looks so adult this morning," I told her. "They grow up whether we're ready or not," Margaret said. "I keep wanting to give him advice about what comes next, but Elena reminded me that he didn't ask for advice. The not asking is the hardest part. I spent so many years anticipating his needs that waiting for him to tell me what he wants feels like doing nothing. Maybe that's because we've been doing too much for too long." I heard something in Margaret's voice, a recognition that seemed to echo my own growing awareness. "Do you think we made him feel suffocated?" "I think we made him feel like our feelings about him were more important than his feelings about himself," Margaret said quietly. "And maybe that's the same thing." That evening, Marcus came home from rehearsal and found me reading in the living room instead of waiting by the door with questions about how everything went. "Rehearsal was good," he offered, settling into the chair across from me. "I'm glad." I marked my place in the book, but didn't close it completely. "Anything you want to talk about?" "Actually, yeah. Some of the other graduates were talking about their families coming, and I realized I never asked if you wanted to invite anyone. I've been so focused on what I didn't want that I forgot to check if there was anyone you wanted there." The question surprised me, and I felt a flutter of the old impulse to turn this into something bigger. But underneath that was something else. Gratitude that he was thinking about my experience too. "I think I'd like it to be just us," I said. "You, me, and Grandma. Simple." "Good. That's what I was hoping you'd say." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I've been thinking about what I said in Elena's office, about needing space sometimes. I want you to know it's not because I don't love you. I know that now, or I'm learning it. It's just that when people are always trying to show how much they care, it starts to feel like their caring is more important than whatever you're actually going through." His words hit me with uncomfortable accuracy. "Like when you were stressed about finals and I kept bringing you snacks and asking how I could help instead of just letting you handle it?" "Exactly. I know you meant well, but it made the stress worse because then I had to manage your worry on top of everything else." I thought about all the times I'd inserted myself into his challenges, believing I was being supportive when I was actually making myself another variable he had to navigate. "I'm sorry," I said. "I thought love meant always trying to fix things." "Sometimes it does, but sometimes it just means trusting that the person you love is capable of handling their own life." The next morning, Margaret called early. "I've been thinking about what Marcus said, about us making our feelings more important than his," she said without preamble. "I think I do that with you too." "What do you mean?" "All these years, I've been so worried about you making mistakes with him that I forgot you might actually know him pretty well. I've been treating you like you were going to mess up, instead of trusting that you love him as much as I do." I felt something shift between us, a recognition that we'd been circling each other as competitors instead of allies. And I've been so defensive about your criticism that I stopped hearing when you might actually have a point, I said. We've been fighting about Marcus instead of supporting him. Or each other. There was a pause, and then Margaret said, Do you think it's too late to change that? Marcus seems to think we can learn. Maybe we should trust his judgment. Graduation morning arrived gray and drizzly. I woke up with nervous energy, the kind I used to channel into elaborate preparations. Instead, I made coffee and sat quietly in the kitchen, letting myself feel excited without needing to do anything about it. Marcus appeared around 9, looking calm but alert. Big day, he said, pouring coffee. How are you feeling? Ready. A little sad, actually. I know I complained about some things, but I did love college. Endings are hard even when they're good endings. Yeah. He sat down across from me. Mom, I want to say something before we go. My chest tightened slightly, the old fear that he was about to pull back again. I've been watching you this week, and I can tell you're really trying. I know it's not easy to change how you show love, but it means everything to me that you're willing to do it. Relief flooded through me. It does feel different, scary sometimes, but better. Good scary or bad scary? I considered this. Good scary, I think, like I'm finally getting to know who you actually are instead of who I thought you should be. Margaret arrived an hour later, carrying a small bouquet of flowers. For Marcus, she explained. Something simple for photos if he wants them. That's perfect, I said, and meant it. But as we prepared to leave for the ceremony, I noticed Marcus growing quieter, more withdrawn. By the time we were in the car, he was staring out the window with an expression I couldn't read. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, just thinking. But something in his tone suggested otherwise, and I found myself facing the first real test of everything we'd been working toward. Every instinct told me to push, to ask more questions, to try to fix whatever was bothering him. Instead, I waited. We drove through the campus in relative silence, windshield wipers creating a steady rhythm against the light rain. I kept glancing at Marcus in the rearview mirror, watching his profile as he continued staring out the window. The closer we got to the ceremony venue, the more tense he seemed to become. My mind began spinning through possibilities. Was he having second thoughts about inviting us? Had our conversation this morning somehow made things worse? Maybe I'd said something wrong, or maybe he was regretting being so open about his feelings. The old me would have been asking rapid-fire questions by now, trying to diagnose and solve whatever was happening. But I'd learned something important this week about the difference between loving someone and managing them. So I kept driving, letting the silence exist without trying to fill it. Margaret must have sensed the shift in energy too, because she stopped making small talk and just held the flowers quietly in her lap. When we pulled into the parking area near the auditorium, Marcus didn't immediately get out of the car. He sat there for a moment, his hand on the door handle. Marcus? Margaret said gently. What's going on, sweetheart? He turned to look at both of us, and I could see something vulnerable in his expression that reminded me of when he was small and worried about the first day of school. I keep thinking about Jake, he said quietly. My heart clenched. Jake was his father, my ex-husband, who had missed most of Marcus's important milestones over the years. Always too busy, always with an excuse, always promising to make it up later. The divorce had been final for over a decade, but the disappointment in Marcus's eyes whenever his father failed to show up never quite went away. Are you worried he might come? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. No, the opposite, actually. I'm worried that part of me still wishes he would. The honesty in his voice nearly broke my heart. I wanted so badly to say something that would make that hurt disappear, to somehow fill that space his father had left empty. But I was learning that some hurts couldn't be fixed, only acknowledged. That makes complete sense, Margaret said. He's your father. Of course, part of you wishes he cared enough to be here. But I also keep thinking about how different today feels because you two are here, really here, not just physically present, but actually wanting to be here for me, not for some idea of what this day should look like. I felt tears prick my eyes. We are here for you, the real you. I know, and that's what's making me emotional, I think. I'm realizing what I've been missing, not just from Dad, but from us too. Like, we could have been doing this all along, actually seeing each other instead of just going through the motions. The rain had stopped, and other families were walking past our car toward the auditorium, laughing and taking pictures. But I didn't feel any urge to rush. This moment felt too important. We're doing it now, I said. That's what matters. Yeah, but I'm also scared, Marcus admitted. What if we can't keep this up? What if we go back to the old patterns once today is over and life gets normal again? I understood his fear because I shared it. These past few days had felt like a revelation, but they'd also been intentional, focused. Would we be able to maintain this new way of relating when we weren't actively working on it? I think that's a risk worth taking, Margaret said. And I think you're all stronger than you give yourselves credit for. The old patterns felt safe even when they weren't working, I said, thinking out loud. This feels scary because it's real. Marcus nodded. Exactly. Like, when you were managing everything, I could just be frustrated with you instead of having to figure out what I actually wanted. And when I was shutting you out, you could focus on trying to fix me instead of dealing with your own stuff. The insight stung because it was so accurate. We were both hiding, I realized. And now we're not, and that feels really vulnerable. Through the windshield, I could see other graduates in their caps and gowns starting to gather near the auditorium entrance. Part of me felt the familiar pull to start organizing, to move us along to stay on schedule. But Marcus was still processing something important, and rushing him would be falling back into old habits. What would help right now? I asked him. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. I guess I need to know that this isn't just a special occasion version of our relationship, that we're not going to go back to pretending everything is fine when it's not. What if we committed to checking in with each other regularly? Margaret suggested. Not in a formal way, but just making sure we're still being honest about how things are really going. Would you want that? I asked Marcus. Or would that feel like pressure? I think I would want that, but maybe we could start small? Like, maybe we could have dinner once a month and actually talk about real things instead of just catching up on surface stuff. The simplicity of the request made me realize how far off course we'd gotten. When had dinner with my son become an obligation instead of something I looked forward to? I'd love that, I said. And maybe sometimes you could just let me figure things out without offering solutions right away, Marcus added, looking at me with a small smile. That's going to be hard for me, but I want to try. I know. That's why it means so much that you're willing to. A group of graduates walked by our car, and one of them waved at Marcus through the window. He waved back, and I could see him starting to shift gears mentally, preparing to rejoin his college world. But there was something different about his energy now. The withdrawn anxiety from earlier had transformed into something that looked more like anticipation mixed with sadness, the complex emotions that come with real transitions rather than the flat worry that comes from avoiding them. "Ready?" I asked. "Yeah, I think so." He paused with his hand on the door again. "Thank you both for letting me have that moment. The old me would have just stuffed it down and been weird all day. The old us would have been too busy taking pictures to notice you were struggling," I admitted. As we got out of the car and started walking toward the ceremony, I felt the weight of the day settling around us differently than I'd expected. Instead of the performance anxiety I usually felt at Marcus's events, I felt genuinely excited to watch him graduate, to see him celebrated for his actual accomplishments, rather than worrying about how our family looked to others. But as we approached the entrance, I noticed Marcus scanning the crowd, and I realized with a sinking feeling that despite everything he'd said, part of him was still looking for his father. I followed Marcus's gaze across the crowd and felt my heart tighten. He was looking for David, even though we all knew David wasn't coming. The hope in his scanning eyes made me want to simultaneously protect him and shake him. Margaret noticed too. She moved slightly closer to Marcus, not in an obvious way, but enough that he could feel her support without her having to say anything about what she'd observed. "You know," I said carefully, "your dad might still surprise us." The words came out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted them. This was exactly the kind of false hope I'd been giving Marcus his whole life about David. Marcus stopped walking and looked at me with something that wasn't quite disappointment, but wasn't gratitude either. "Mom, you don't have to do that anymore. Remember what we just talked about?" He was right. We just committed to honesty, and here I was, already backsliding into the comfortable lie that maybe this time would be different with David. "You're absolutely right," I said. "I'm sorry. I just saw you looking, and I wanted to fix it." "I was looking," Marcus admitted. "Part of me is always going to look, but I wasn't looking because I expected him to be here. I was looking because I wanted to see what it felt like to accept that he's not coming, instead of pretending I don't care." Margaret nodded approvingly. "That sounds like a very mature way to handle disappointment." "It feels terrible," Marcus said with a small laugh. "But different, terrible than usual." We continued toward the entrance, joining the stream of families making their way to the ceremony. I noticed how other parents were taking pictures, adjusting their graduates' caps, making small talk about the weather and their children's post-graduation plans. It all looked so normal and easy. "I keep thinking we should be taking pictures," I said. "Do you want to take pictures?" Marcus asked. I considered this. Did I want pictures, or did I want other people to see us taking pictures? "I think I want to remember this moment, but not necessarily capture it." "That makes sense," Margaret said. "Sometimes trying to document everything makes you miss what's actually happening." As we approached the seating area, Marcus pointed toward where the graduates were supposed to gather. "I need to go line up in a few minutes." "Before you go," I said, then paused. I'd been about to launch into a speech about how proud I was of him, how much this day meant to me, all the things I thought I was supposed to say. Instead, I just looked at him, really looked at him, and said what I actually felt. "I'm glad you're my son." He smiled, and for the first time all day, it reached his eyes. "I'm glad you're my mom too, even when I'm embarrassed by you." "Especially when you're embarrassed by me," I said. "That probably means I'm doing something right." "Or something very wrong," Marcus countered, but he was still smiling. Margaret was watching our exchange with what looked like relief, mixed with something else I couldn't quite identify. maybe pride in both of us for figuring out how to have a real conversation. "Okay," Marcus said, adjusting his cap. "I really do need to go line up now." But as he started to walk away, I saw him glance once more toward the entrance, and I realized that despite everything we'd talked through, despite his mature acceptance of David's absence, there was still a part of him hoping his father might walk through those doors at the last minute. And then, impossibly, I saw David's familiar figure emerging from behind a group of parents near the entrance, looking around with the slightly frantic expression he got when he was running late for something important. The world seemed to shift into slow motion. I watched Marcus freeze mid-step, his graduation cap slightly askew from where he'd been adjusting it. His eyes locked onto his father's figure, and I could see every emotion play across his face in rapid succession. Surprise, hope, uncertainty, and something that looked almost like fear. "Is that—" Margaret started to say, following my gaze. "David," I finished quietly. David was scanning the crowd now, clearly looking for us. He was dressed in his good navy suit, the one he usually reserved for important work presentations, and he was carrying a small bouquet of flowers that looked hastily purchased from a grocery store. When his eyes finally found our small group, his pace quickened. Marcus still hadn't moved. He was standing there like a statue, halfway between us and where he was supposed to line up with his fellow graduates. "Marcus," I said gently, "you should go get in line. They're probably starting soon." But Marcus didn't seem to hear me. He was entirely focused on his father's approach, and I realized this moment was going to define something important for him, regardless of how David handled it. David reached us slightly out of breath. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said, his words tumbling out quickly. "The traffic was terrible, and I couldn't find parking, and I thought I might have missed the whole thing." "You came?" Marcus said, and his voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear him over the general noise of families gathering. "Of course I came," David replied, then seemed to catch himself. "I mean, I know I said I might not be able to make it, but I couldn't miss this. This is important." I watched Margaret stiffen slightly beside me. She'd heard enough of our earlier conversations to understand the context here, to know that David's casual dismissal of his previous uncertainty wasn't sitting well. "You said you had a work thing," Marcus said, and there was something careful in his tone, like he was afraid of the answer. David waved his hand dismissively. "I moved some things around. Work will always be there, but you only graduate once, right?" The silence that followed was heavy. I could see Marcus processing this, trying to reconcile his father's easy explanation with the weeks of uncertainty he'd been carrying. "Marcus," Margaret said gently, "don't you need to check in with your class?" Marcus looked torn, glancing between his father and the area where other graduates were gathering. "I should probably go line up," he said reluctantly. "Go ahead," David said, extending the flowers toward him. "These are for after. I'll be right here cheering you on." Marcus took the flowers, but I noticed he didn't smile. "Thanks, Dad." He looked at me, then at Margaret. "I'll see you all after?" "We'll be right here," I assured him. As Marcus walked away toward the graduate assembly area, I could see the tension in his shoulders. This should have been a moment of pure relief for him. His father had shown up, had chosen to be here, but something about the interaction had left him unsettled. "Well," David said, turning to Margaret and me with a smile that seemed forced, "looks like I made it just in time." Margaret's response was polite but cool. "Yes, you did." I found myself studying David's face, trying to understand what had really brought him here. The David I knew didn't just move things around at work, especially not at the last minute. His schedule was sacred to him, planned weeks in advance. "What changed your mind?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. David shifted uncomfortably. "Nothing changed my mind. I always planned to be here." "That's not what you told Marcus," Margaret said quietly. David's smile faltered. "Look, I had some scheduling conflicts, but I worked them out. Isn't that what matters? I'm here now." "Is it what matters?" I asked, and I wasn't sure if I was asking him or myself. "Of course it is," David said, but he sounded defensive. "Marcus wanted me here, and I'm here." I looked toward where Marcus was standing with his graduating class. Even from a distance, I could see him glancing back toward us, his expression troubled. "David?" I said carefully. "He spent weeks not knowing if you'd show up. He planned for you not to be here because he was trying to protect himself from disappointment." "But I am here," David repeated, as if that erased everything that had come before. Margaret stepped closer to me, and I could feel her support without her having to say anything. "The uncertainty was hard on him," she said to David. David looked genuinely confused. "But it worked out fine. I figured out a way to make it work." I realized then that David truly didn't understand the impact of his indecision. In his mind, showing up had solved the problem completely. He couldn't see that Marcus had spent weeks preparing emotionally for his absence, that the uncertainty itself had been its own kind of hurt. "The ceremony's starting," Margaret observed, nodding toward the front where someone was approaching a podium. We found seats together, David on one side of me and Margaret on the other. As we settled in, David leaned over and whispered, "He looks good up there, doesn't he? Very mature." I nodded, but I was thinking about Marcus's expression when his father had dismissed his previous uncertainty so casually. There would be more conversation needed after this ceremony was over.